AI security is in a confusing state at the moment. Many organizations just don't know how to attack the problem at all, and they're looking for answers. But I'm here to say, it doesn't have to be confusing. When I look at most of what is problematic for organizations at the moment, AI security really is just the subset of the identity security problem. So today we're going to dive deeper into that, and we'll discuss all the pillars of identity security from that AI lens and show you how you can start reframing this problem to make it less confusing for you.
Attackers know identity is the weakest link. Permiso knows how to protect those identities better than anyone else.
Now, there are some frameworks already available for helping understand the AI security problem. I'm just going to touch on 3 of them. There are a whole bunch of them out there, and you should explore them too and see which ones resonate with you. But these are the 3 that I feel like at least help spell out the problem really well. So like any compliance related stuff, I would always be keeping an eye on what NIST is putting out. So they have their AI risk management framework. They're just a little too high level, not enough real world in the NIST framework, but it does give you something to build from, something to start categorizing your organization's risk within the confines of what they're defining. I mean, they have 3 big categories of map, manage, and measure, which all lead into how you govern your AI security. And if you're looking at map, manage, and measure, you don't even have to really read too far in to understand what they're trying to say here, which is know what you have, figure out how, what the risk is associated with each, and then how do you measure progress in reducing that risk and that drift of AI security management. So that's your NIST framework. Pay attention to what they're putting out, and you'll see some good stuff there. Now, Google put out SAIF, the Secure AI framework, which actually kind of fits into a similar model as what NIST put out, but they just get a little more real world, which I love. Now, I will say there is a lot left to build out in the framework that they have, but it seems to be, at least for me, the more promising place to go when you're trying to understand how you should be safely creating AI related stuff. I don't think they deal too much with how you should be interacting with AI things, but they do a good job of talking about how you should manage the risk of creating your own AI infrastructure. So highly recommend that model for folks who want to dive deeper into there. And then of course, the MITRE folks have the attack matrix, right? They have another matrix called the Atlas matrix, which is similar in style to what they did with the attack framework, which is just mapping out what are the TTPs that we know that you need to be paying attention to in the AI world. Now, the thing I would say on the Atlas matrix side is great that we have this and we can all start measuring, particularly for us on the detection engineering side, right? We want to know what are the actual attacks we should be watching out for so we can start working on how do we detect them. I would just say a lot of it is very hypothetical. Great to know what the art of possible is, but not a lot of this in the wild. And so take a good look at the Atlas matrix to know across the attacker lifecycle, what are the things you should be paying attention to. But one of the things you'll start to realize as you're looking through it is a lot of the, especially the in a wild attacks that we're seeing, are just like credential stealing, and then using those credentials maliciously. While you'll hear a lot about things like model poisoning or stealing weights, stuff like that. Don't really see a lot of that in the wild. What do we really see? We see people stealing credentials meant for AI agents or interacting with models, and then using those credentials to further, their own goal, the bad guy goal, financial gain, data theft, whatever it happens to be. But it's almost always been more of an identity problem than an AI problem so far. And what we're seeing through our decidedly biased lens of being an identity security company. So these 3 frameworks, I think, will give you a good idea at a high level how you should be thinking about AI. And then even when we get into that Atlas side, what you should be thinking about from what is the art of possible for attackers, but what's the real world, right? When I think about the current state of AI security, there are a few things that really stick out to me. I wonder, maybe I have it over here. Let's see, actually. I have running. Oh, I do. Nice. I like to take a peek at what other people are doing, obviously. So when I see somebody, launching a new AI related product or a new identity related or whatever it happens to be, I want to understand what they're looking at, what they're doing. And one of the things I'm really realizing about the AI security stuff as I look through all these products that are up here, and Again, not picking on these guys as much as trying to understand, their approach, right? So when I look at Wiz, what are the AI security related things that they have in their publicly accessible screenshot? Who knows what they have on the inside? But they're looking for things like publicly exposed bucket used for AI training, very infrastructure focused, publicly exposed VM serverless you can get the, essentially what they're doing in here. As I look through, here's Orca, pretty much the same stuff as what they're looking for. Defender for cloud, same. They're almost all of them are looking for very infrastructure heavy and resource heavy related things. And I won't bother going through all these, but just so you have an idea, I'm just not seeing too many folks that are doing really innovative stuff on the AI side. It's more applying that common infrastructure posture view to the AI lens. And what that got me really thinking about once I got over to here, great. For the folks who are watching versus listening, hopefully you're getting to see some cool screenshots here. Great. So, but when I start really thinking about the current state of AI security, that's what I'm really noticing is it's very infrastructure heavy, very posture and configuration focused, and resource centric, meaning the bucket, the EC2 instance, the Lambda that's involved, and that resource very often tied to the cloud, the infrastructure side of AI. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, right? Those are things that people should be thinking about, but it really feels more like traditional CSPM, cloud security posture management to me from what most people are putting out. Now, I will say there are a few vendors that are doing some interesting things in this space too. When I was peeking around, some good friends over at Hidden Layer, I think they have an interesting take on what they're going after. But overall, I would say the majority of AI security is stuck in infrastructure and posture. And the problem with that for me is when I think about real risk of AI right now, very little of that is in that bucket, right? First, most organizations don't build their own AI infrastructure. They're using a hosted version somewhere else, or if they're using AI at all, right? And I think we could all agree there are more people using AI than there are organizations building AI stuff. Right. Maybe that changes over time. So I think that's one big problem is when we do this infrastructure centric view, it really only applies to the people who are the large organizations that are building up their own AI infrastructure. Yeah. And the other part of that is when I think about the real AI risk, it's actually less about the people who are building AI things and definitely not agents, right? I think everyone talks about AI agents and how that is a huge problem for all organizations. There's, depending on how you define agents, there's not a lot of that yet. I know OpenAI is saying this is the year of agents, and maybe we'll get there. And OpenKit is cool, but we're not there yet. Right. So where do we see most of our AI stuff at the moment? It's people using AI. And what are your risks? Misusing AI stuff, right? It's less malicious stuff. We'll talk about a few that are malicious, but it's actually more on the misuse side that at least most organizations that we here at Permiso have been helping out on this problem, they're more concerned about the misusage in general. And in fact, the most common question I get related to AI security when I'm talking to an organization, they'll just ask me, hey, Ian, can you help me understand what is even real? What are we doing in AI? Who's using AI related services? What services are they using? What models are they using? But the way they frame that question every time I'm hearing it is very identity centric. They want to know who is using the model and maybe what they're doing with it. But that's always the first question is hey, who in my organization is even doing anything AI related? The way we kind of break things down on the Permiso side is we have 3 pillars in our product. We have discover, protect, and defend. And you may recognize from that previous segment there where we went over the NIST framework, not terribly different than how NIST defines theirs, right? They have map, measure, and manage, actually pretty similar to what we're doing. Discover is just got to know what you have. And that's the question that we get most of the time from organizations right now related to AI is they want to know what they have. Once you know what you have, you can start then understanding the risk of it, right? That's our protect module where we understand what are exposures associated with the identity that has AI connections. And then The last part, and maybe the most important part, and the part that I just don't think many organizations are really at the state to be able to do quite yet, is the defend part, monitoring for drift of that risk, but also for malicious actions and misuse of AI stuff. But I always think it's like better to talk about this with a real thing. So let's actually start on the discover part. When organizations are coming up to me and asking, "Hey, Ian, can you help me understand AI usage?" Sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive what they're looking for, right? Because I come at it from the detection engineering defense side, where I want to go find the bad thing that's occurring. But a lot of organizations, why are they asking that question? Well, they've been given a mandate that they have to increase the amount of AI usage within their organization in order to meet the goals of whoever is designating that, right? The executive team decides in order to be more productive, we got to adopt AI. Now a team gets that mandate and they want to be able to measure that. Well, how do you measure that? Right. And, but it's interesting. Like as a product, I mostly associate with detection on our side, even though we do other things, right? We're leaning heavy into the visibility side, especially recently. We're being used to measure adoption rather than misuse sometimes, right? They want to, organizations want to know, can they show, yeah, we're using AI applications 70% more than we were previous quarter. Cool. Right. So that's like a real example of the discover side. And you may have actual questions, right? At a certain point here, actually, let's see. Let's go over here real quick. Yeah, great. So this is from a blog article we did recently where we're showing off some of our identity AI visibility stuff. But sometimes you're going to have specific questions, right? You're just going to want to know who are your AI users, maybe really generally, right? Oh, you got 50 AI users in your organization, but maybe you want to know who uses ChatGPT, and you don't care how they use it, whether that's through federated access to ChatGPT directly. Maybe it's from Copilot using a ChatGPT model, right? You don't care how they're using it, but you want to know all the uses of ChatGPT. Great, ask that. But maybe you have questions that are a little bit different. Maybe it's who's building AI related services, or who in my organization has uploaded a document to ChatGPT or DeepSeek, or whatever that happens. Whatever your question is. Well, to me, I almost treat these like little detections. Everything that you see up here, we call them badges, but I treat like each AI feature like that as a badge, as almost as like a little detection, but not a detection of something bad, a detection of an attribute of an identity. But it's really, really cool way of thinking about that. But I thought it'd be good to show an actual example up there of what that looks like. But let's go back over to the Scala draw here. So really important to know what your AI usage is like. Then you can protect it, right? You want to know who's overprivileged and the like. Then you can worry about the defense side. But let's actually do this for a second. Let's call out a recent example that I don't think people understand is actually AI related, which is that SalesLoft drift incident, which if you want a full breakdown on that, go check out episode 1, where I covered this in full depth. But what I really want to cover here is this is an AI security incident, right? And I don't think enough people call it out as that because, well, it looks like an identity security issue. And spoiler warning, AI security and identity security, it blends pretty well. So let's talk about this. A recap for folks who weren't paying attention a few weeks ago when the SalesLoft drift thing occurred. But essentially, a threat actor was able to compromise the infrastructure for SalesLoft, which was an AWS infrastructure. And in that infrastructure, they were able to steal hundreds of OAuth tokens belonging to organizations that use SalesLoft to connect into Salesforce and a few other places like Google Workspace and Slack. The attacker was then able to use that OAuth token, connect into Salesforce with the credentials associated with the user who had set it up, and then steal a bunch of case data, which they were then using to do further credential harvesting, and then doing some post-exploit activity into various other places like Snowflake and AWS for those organizations. So high level, steal some creds, use those creds to take a lot of data, harvest, triage through that data, looking through that data for more credentials to then do further post-exploitation activity. When I say this is an AI-related incident, why? Well, what is SalesLoft Drift? SalesLoft Drift is an AI application, an AI chatbot interface into Salesforce. That's all it is, right? It's something that you go type in a box and say, hey, what company should I talk to today? And it'll go and run a bunch of queries in Salesforce to figure that out and summarize it back to you. That's what SalesLoft Drift was, or I guess is. Like most AI attacks that we see, it's really just stealing credentials used for AI applications or AI users or AI agents or interfacing with AI models directly, stealing those credentials, and then the attacker using those credentials for their own gain. So that's what a real AI malicious security incident looks like. It's just stealing credentials. And in this case, it's stealing a whole bunch of OAuth tokens. We've talked about other ones in the past. Actually, let me do this one, right? This is from October 3rd, 2024. Man, I had a good beard back in those days. And this is another example of AI related incident that is mostly just, again, identity security. What was going on here? Well, bad guys were finding exposed credentials from wherever they could find them, whether that be on GitHub, within Android applications, strings, or whatever other places people wanted to go look for credentials. Right? They would find those credentials, particularly into AWS at the time. Now it's more actually directly focused on tokens with OpenAI directly or Anthropic directly, right? But they would go and find credentials, using those credentials, see if they had appropriate access into being able to use Bedrock, which is the AWS service for hosting AI stuff. And if they were able to, they would then use AWS Bedrock on your behalf. So you would foot the bill for whatever they happen to be doing with your AI models. We call this LM jacking or LM hijacking. It's when they're hijacking your infrastructure to power their own stuff. For a while, we actually saw a lot more of this instead of what was traditionally being done by these same type of threat actors, which was doing coin mining, right? This just turned into a much more lucrative effort for them. And this one, man, deserves a whole podcast episode on its own. And I think I will at some point. But what was the attacker actually doing with this? Hosting a lot of not safe for work chatbots, which I guess maybe I need to go back and check, but maybe less of a market for now that you can just go to X and do it there or whatever other services that are already up there legitimately now. So that's another example of like a real incident. What I really want to talk about today, though, is we'll get into some real attacks in the future and even some real exposures in the future too. But I really want to talk about the discover pillar. How do you even know what your AI users are in an organization? And when I say AI users, what do I mean? These are your people who are actually utilizing AI stuff, right? Your people who are using Cursor. They have the comment browser. In Slack, they use the AI features. They have Loom. They're using the MCP for AWS. Whatever the thing is that's AI related, they are consumers of that thing. And really, we break it down into these three buckets that you see up here. When it comes to AI related identities, you have your users which you just covered, are builders. These are the people who manage or create the infrastructure or manage the applications associated with AI stuff. And then the third bucket, which is the one everyone seems to be really concerned about, but is just not an area where I think it doesn't deserve as much scrutiny right now because there's just not a lot of it, but it's your AI agents. And when people are thinking about AI agent security right now, it's just very interesting where heads go versus the reality of the world. What is the most common agents that we see across everywhere? It's actually agents sitting on endpoints, agents like Cursor or Quad Code or Codex, right? Like those are very common things. And at least by most people's definition, would be considered an agent. But I think what most people are worried about in the agent world is like this autonomous thing sitting hosted somewhere that's doing all the actions. That doesn't really exist for most organizations at this time. But AI users, AI builders, and AI agents is how we categorize our AI-related identities. We've talked about the pillars already, right? Discover, protect, and defend. But again, I really want to just spend more time talking about the discover portion. And when I first started thinking about this problem, I get a question from a client, and the client's like, "Hey, Ian, can you help me understand who my AI users are?" And when I was first talking to them, I'm like, "Oh, what do you mean? You like people who invoke Bedrock? Is that what you want to know? You want to know people who are using AWS Bedrock? or using Azure Cognitive Services? Are you looking for that? Or are you looking for like people who are using ChatGPT in their web browser, or people who have Quad Desktop installed? What is the thing that you're looking for, organization? And the reply back to that was, I hadn't thought about that. All of it. Let's look at all of them. So when I started trying to like really understand how could I know an organization's real AI footprint, naturally start off with my own AI footprint. I'm an early adopter. I use a lot of AI related stuff, and we'll actually call it out up here, right? So in my general AI usage, I have a federated ChatGPT access through Permiso that I use. I also have my own personal ChatGPT account. I do the same thing for Claude. I should put a ×2 here. I have my own personal one. I have a Permiso one. I use Perplexity. On the coding side, I have my own cursor license for when I'm doing personal projects. And then I have a Permiso, a cursor license that I use when I'm doing Permiso related stuff. I also like to use Claude Code and Codex. I'm a big fan of 11 Labs. If any of you guys saw my Permiso podcaster stuff back in the day. And then I also use things like Slack, Teams, Copilot. We have our own MCP. We have our own chatbot. We have a ton of SaaS applications with cool stuff. So I am a prolific AI user. So this is the way I use AI stuff, right? This is my AI profile. And then I try to think about how I would know all this. And I guess another interesting thing to point out when we look at the categories of AI identities that we have from before, I am an AI user, definitely an AI user. I also build a lot of AI related stuff. So I would put myself in that category. And my identity runs a bunch of agents. So I would also include myself if I was listing out all my AI agents. Well, I have some credentials associated with me that I would put into that AI agent bucket as well. I have some pretty prolific AI usage. This is just a subset of it. This isn't everything. But when I look at this list, I try to think about how would I actually discover this, right? If I was tasked at finding my own AI usage, how would I go about doing so? And what I quickly realized is, man, just scanning configuration data is not enough, right? If you were just going to look at who has federated access to ChatGPT versus who actually is leveraging or using ChatGPT. Like those are two problems I'd have to answer very differently. Same thing with kind of any of these up here, right? Like who has access to a license for Slack AI stuff versus who is actually using it, which side tangent again brings me to another common AI question I get is I'm paying for 300 people to have access to Copilot. How many people are actually using it? Only 20? Oh my goodness. Why am I paying for 300 people to have that? Right. And same thing with all of these. Like they want to measure adoption, but they also want to cut costs and find the bad things. This visibility layer that we've built like really helps out with that. So we're often able to answer, questions across all those realms. But when I started looking at this list, what I started, and this could be my bias, is coming from the detection engineering space, right? Like that is my bread and butter. And I guess when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When I looked at this, I was like, well, this to me feels like if I see Copilot interaction as an event, I can say that that person has used Copilot. Not just they use Copilot, they used it within the team's workload. Okay, so now I have some attributes of that AI usage. It's not just they use Copilot, it's that they use Copilot and they used it in the team's workload. So, which is different than using it in Word, but which is different than using it in Excel or wherever else you happen to be. More, and even more importantly, was in that interaction, that Copilot interaction, was it a question that touched out to external resources, or did it touch internal SharePoint or internal Confluence to answer that question? So the more I started thinking about like, it's not enough just to say somebody uses Copilot. I want to be able to say how they're using Copilot. It became really clear to me you have to treat this almost like the detection game, right? Where you have different signals for each of those things and can derive some meaning based off of those signals firing. So when somebody performs an action, if I go and upload a document to ChatGPT, well, that means I'm an AI user. It means I'm an AI user of ChatGPT. Means that when I use ChatGPT, sometimes I am a person who uploads documents and, that document had a DOP flag on it for being sensitive, for having a particular phrase in it. So now Ian is a user of ChatGPT. He's an AI user. And when he uploads documents, sometimes he uploads sensitive ones. We learn a lot about an identity based off of that one exchange, that one action that occurred. So that's how we think about the world, right? If you were just going to try to do this from looking at scan or configuration data, you're going to miss the majority. In fact, when I started applying this approach, the majority of AI related identities that I find, I derive from runtime activity, not from some configuration data or not from scanning some API. I get it from looking at the log sources associated with all the applications that these get sit in, looking at Slack logs, looking at Teams logs, looking at your Okta or Entra logs to see what applications you're clicking into. That's where you learn the majority of AI usage. And then the other part is I see a lot of people focus on just non-human identities for this, right? Or machine identities, or they're sometimes called that, right? Like these are, they look at access keys and OAuth tokens, and there's good reason for that, right? A lot of those get baked into AI agents and the like. But when I am performing my AI activity, the majority of that is coming through my normal human identity, not through some other credential that you could associate as being non-human. So if you're only looking at the non-human side of this equation, you're going to miss a lot. So good. I actually forgot I made this. So when we think about it from a credential stance, right? From that same list you have above, if we break down the credential portion of it, well, some of it I'm accessing directly federated, right? So ChatGPT, Teams, Cursor, Slack, even our Permiso AI agent that we have in our product, right? I get that through federated normal human identity. Now, in some of these, I also have my own local identity within, which I was still kind of mostly put in that human bucket for most of these local IAM stuff, right? So for ChatGPT, I have, in addition to my work one, I have a personal one that I have my own regular local login into. Same thing with Perplexity and Cursor and 11 Labs, right? Lots of others as well. When I look at which of my AI usage things is associated with an NHI, with a machine identity, well, only a few, right? Our Permiso MCP, I use an OAuth token to do that. AWS MCP, sometimes I use a role. Sometimes I use long-lived access key for interacting with the AWS MCP, right? So there, I would throw that as an NHI as well. And then there are OAuth settings in various applications, right? Like where you can use some to interact with them. But most of my AI usage actually sits in a human world, or what would traditionally be considered the human world. So if you're trying to find your AI identities, gotta look at your human connection there. You can't just focus on the machine stuff. All right. Let's actually give you an example of how you could go find some AWS MCP usage. So make sure okay, good. Making sure I blurred out all the appropriate things there. Awesome. So if you're not aware, AWS has their own MCP server. And man, MCP is a whole topic that we'll have to take a day on, especially with the postmark incident of late as well. But MCP, think of it as an abstraction layer to an API. Like most large providers, AWS has created an MCP that allows you to interact with the AWS API in a normal human language way through that MCP. Now, when you're using the official AWS MCP, there are certain markers of that. And while this is true for this official version of the AWS MCP, anybody can make their own MCP server for interacting with AWS, and this wouldn't be true, right? So this is only how I would go looking for official AWS MCP usage. But in AWS, if you use their MCP, just look for user agents that contain AWS Labs/MCP. That'll tell you that this request came from them. So in this case, what was this request? Well, I used the AWS MCP to list all the access keys from IAM. And in this particular case, it's going kind of one by one through each user first, and then listing out the access keys for each of the users, and with the user being targeted here being Paul Martin, which is a common demo user I'd like to leverage. And you can also tell based on the parameters up here, the user identity access key ID, that I'm using a long-lived access key with the MCP from the Paul Martin account to look for more access keys associated with the Paul Martin account. So that's what's going on here. But if you wanted to say, go discover your organization's usage of MCP, like if somebody said, hey, can you go find me everybody who's using an MCP? Well, here's one of the things you would go look for. You would have a different way of going to find that for various other MCPs out there. Or in our larger scheme of things, right? This is how I find the AWS MCP. When I want to know if somebody's using Copilot, I look for Copilot interaction, that event in the 365 side of the house. If I want to know who's touched cursor via federation, well, now I'm looking at my Okta or Entra logs to see who has clicked in successfully SSO'd and clicked into that application. So I guess what I'm trying to convey there is there are many ways to find AI usage, and like your detections and how you go and find the 2,000 ways somebody could do persistence in an environment. Well, you have to think about finding AI usage very similarly. Right? There's going to be lots and lots of ways, and you're going to learn more and more every day about finding those. So to sum everything else up from today, let's go back this way over here. Let's do a quick recap of everything here at the end. There are some good frameworks. Make sure you're paying attention to them and watching for new ones to understand how the world is thinking about AI security. So the NIST framework, Google's SAIF framework, and Atlas Matrix are kind of my three that I like to pay attention to. But when it really comes down to it, my stance is AI security is mostly just identity security, where you're focusing in on particular identity types. What are those identity types? Those are your AI users, your AI builders, and AI agents. And if you want to understand visibility wise, like the first question every organization has is, what is my AI footprint? You have to think about it from not just the configuration stance, but the runtime perspective of these, right? Your AI users, your builders, and your agents. I give you a few examples on what you can do for looking for those, and also just kind of showed you what my AI footprint looks like and how I thought about how I would detect my own. And I would encourage you to do that, right? Your footprints could be a little different than mine. And maybe it makes you think about how you would detect how you interact with AI in a larger organization. And hey, we just covered the discover pillar here. I hope in a further episode, we'll kind of go deeper on the protect and the defend side and talk to you about the risk. We just covered visibility, the discover side. But now let's talk about the protect and defend side, where you'll learn more about what are the actual risks, what are the real world risks associated with AI stuff, what do we actually see, and how you can go about detecting it yourself. All right. So thank you for sticking with me on this one. If you've made it this far, really appreciate it. Do the like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. Give me a comment as well. Let me know how we're doing. And I hope to see you on the next one. Peace.